Hello and welcome to the next tutorial in the series of getting started with the Liveblocks plugin for Bubble. One of the first features you'll likely want to use after setting up Liveblocks in your app is the presence element. Presence lets you track who's on a page and can be used to create features like activity indicators or online statuses. In this demo, we'll build a real-time presence indicator where it will show on the page when users are active. And while we will build everything live on the screen here together, for the exact setup from this tutorial, you can visit the links in the description and try out the demo for yourself. So before we get started, you'll want to make sure you've already followed the setup guide where we go through creating a Bubble app, creating a Liveblocks account, creating a Liveblocks project, and installing the plugin from the Bubble marketplace. So if you haven't done that, definitely pause here and go check out that 2-minute video. And with all of that said, preface out of the way, we can get into it. So right now I'm inside that demo that we set up in that tutorial that I mentioned on setting up the plugin and creating an app. The first thing we're going to do is actually kind of make some changes to our database. So we're going to add some users, since users will show up in a real production app. You would actually have like a login system. You just wouldn't have like random users on the page, but a login system or some other system to identify people. To make things simple and really just focus on the functionality of the plugin, we're just going to put in some demo users or dummy users. And so let's go to this data tab here. We already have a user data type. It kind of comes with all Bubble apps when you create a new Bubble app. And we're just going to add 2 new fields. We'll want a name field and a profile image field. So let's add the name field. And the field type is going to be of type text. And we'll also add a profile image field. And that is going to be of type image. Next, we're going to update the privacy settings. So like I said, this is just demo app. We are focusing on the functionality of the plugin. So since it's a demo app, we're not going to have people sign in and log in and do all of that setup. We will just make kind of all the fields visible and make it so that they're available in searches. In a real production app though, you would want to keep this user data sensitive and more refined. I'll also put in the show links, just resources around privacy settings in Bubble. But since we're not doing a login system, we can just make the changes that we need so everybody can see the information. Then we'll go to our app data tab here. This is where we're going to add some sample data, which I do have a CSV that is linked, also part of the kind of written guide that accompanies this video. So we're going to post some of that information. And I also have some dummy images also that we can use. We'll only need, if you're on a paid plan, you can just upload the CSV. But if you're not on the paid plan, don't worry. We just need to create 3 users, which we'll do together right now. So I already have this tab open. First, I'm going to create this Aisha person. And then just like a simple dummy email. Oh yeah, and then I'm going to upload. I have the video. I have images here, which I'll provide to you as well, or you can use whatever profile images. I got these images from Unsplash. Then we'll create another user. We'll just do the 3. While the CSV has like 10 users, you just need 3 to test with for our demo. Then we'll put the email and then our last user here, Sophia. Great. So we have our 3 users. And next we'll work on kind of like what the design is. It's a little bit not super directly related to the plugin, but just like a very simple UI. If you want, you can definitely skip ahead to the section that is just about adding the presence element, but here we're gonna create a new page. So we're just gonna add a new page. We're gonna give the page a name, something like presence tutorial. And we won't clone for anything. We can create here. First things first, we're gonna click on the page and we're gonna change the layout of the page. We'll go to the layout tab. Instead of fixed, so that it can be like responsive, we'll make it column. And then here we have the magic of adding the presence element. So this presence element is kind of just like a listener that goes on the page. It doesn't really need to, it just needs to be somewhere on the page. And so for elements like these, I love always just creating a hidden pop-up. So I'm gonna create a pop-up here and then drag this Liveblocks element onto the pop-up. It's never going to render, it's not going to affect with our design, or it's never going to pop up, but I like hidden pop-ups because they're a way to just, if you need some information to just be on the page, just hold that information there. Okay, next up we're going to add a floating group. So our real-time presence tracker is just going to be a floating group. We're going to put our avatars in the floating group and it's going to stay on our page. So search for a floating group. And you can create the floating group. For the appearance of the floating group, we want to vertically float relative to the top. We're going to horizontally float relative to left. Floating z-index is going to be above elements, which is all good. In the layout tab, we're actually going to make it not fixed width, but 100%. And same here, just make it 100, actually px is what we want for the minimum height. And we'll check fit height to content. And we won't check fit width to content, that is fine. So that is our floating group. We're going to add a repeating group to this floating group. So the repeating group, that is going to kind of hold the avatars. A cool thing about repeating groups, and I'll also link some information about those in the show notes in the description, is that they can hold like data. So we'll use the repeating group to hold who are all the people who are currently in the room, which is going to be in our Liveblocks presence. And then based on that, it will show the correct amount of users. So let's just grab this repeating group and plop it in here. We'll make some changes here to the kind of how it looks. So we'll set the type of content to actually text. And the data source is going to be Liveblocks presence and then everyone, which the everyone state from the Liveblocks presence, it will hold all users in the room, including the local user. Others in this case includes people who aren't the local user. And for the full kind of spec of what this element is and what's included, you can also check out the documentation, which I will put in the description. So we've got that. We're in the appearance tab. We're going to check set fixed number of rows. Only one row here. Uncheck set fixed number of columns. It can be as many columns, as many users as we have. We'll set the minimum width, I guess to 20%. Why not? We don't want any separators. And we also do not want a border. So we're going to set the border to none. And then in the layout tab, we're going to set the make sure the cells container layout is column. Set the container alignment to top. Element is visible. We're going to uncheck, yeah, so make this element fixed width. We'll set the minimum height to 0, so it's really just however big it is. We'll check fit height to content. We'll check fit width to content. The minimum width, we can leave but or make the group. So we're going to put this into the repeating group. So drag that into the repeating group. We can also rename it for fun. Avatar group. Or actually, we'll just call it group user. For the content, it's going to be user. And then for the data source, we're actually going to do something called do a search for. So this is why, because we're not logging in, we made the find and searches just available for everyone. View all fields and find all fields and searches. So we've got user, search for users, and how we're going to connect Liveblocks to our Bubble app. So every time we create a user, we actually have a unique ID. We're going to make that when we create our workflows and authorize in Liveblocks, we're going to make that unique ID. We're going to send that to Liveblocks. So Liveblocks, when it's telling us who's in the room, we'll be able to connect it to like, oh, it's the people in our database. So unique ID will equal current sales text. And so this is going to give us everyone, and we will just do the first item. So unique ID, there's really only going to be one person, but the data source needs to be a single item, not like a list. So we'll put first item. Cool, cool. And then we'll put an image in our group. So we just drag it in the property editor. We'll set the image to parent group's user's profile image. And then we'll also, profile image, we'll also do something here called process with imagix. So we'll auto enhance the image. We'll set the quality to 100. Resize to fit the dimensions by cropping. Apply a circle, ellipse / mask. I think that's it. We don't have to worry about red eyes, but you can add other effects if you would so desire. Cool. And then we'll actually add a border to the image, so it's kind of like active. This is where, especially with border or not border, if you wanted to, maybe you have an app where there are a lot of users, you wanted to show who was online, offline, not just necessarily show by having their profile image show up. This is where you might decide to, for like active, you could add conditions where if it's active or if they do show up in our presence element, we make it a green highlight. If they didn't show up, we gray them out. But for here, we're just going to add a border. So border, we're going to do solid. Let's maybe add some roundness. Yeah, add some roundness here. Later we'll change the size of it, so it'll actually be round, so we can make 1000 for the roundness or whatever. And I'll just make it the success screen color, which is kind of built in. And then in the layout tab here, we are going to set the width to 50px. It's a photo, so we want to keep the element fixed width, or keep the element aspect ratio fixed width, keep it 1:1. And that should be it for really setting up the design here. Setting up the design. Minimum width should actually be 100%. And then we can just say maybe, yeah, we'll actually change the minimum width of the column to just 0%. The repeating group text. But yes, that's it for the design. We put our Liveblocks presence element up. We have our kind of group of avatars. And now we're going to go on to the workflows. So workflows are where most of the interaction with Liveblocks will happen. So first things first, we actually need to create a room. So we will create a workflow that runs on page load to create a room for the demo. Because if you haven't used Liveblocks before, you'll need a room. We can create that with the actions. This is just going to be a one-time workflow. So we will look for on page load. So click here to add an event. General page is loaded. We'll do Liveblocks create a room. And for this room, and then for the room ID, we can set it to like tutorial. I'll set mine to tutorial room. Tutorial room. And we can make the default access to public. And one thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to also add another plugin. It's called Error Alert. It's really great for just confirming that actions run. So Error Alert is what it's called. Error Alert, you can install that. Also linked. That will let us add a little notification. So we can add an error alert standard. We can say room is created. Room. This room was created. And then we can add the ID, which is kind of like the room name. And we can preview the page just to make sure that room was created and that it ran. So let's click to preview. All right, room is created. So we have our tutorial room. Took a little while to start up here, but we created our tutorial room, so that is good. We have confirmed that that exists. So now we can disable this workflow because we only needed it once to create a room. So now that we can do all of our other action to actually see who's in the room. And now we can create a workflow to actually enter the room. So we'll create another on page load, pages loaded workflow. First, we'll actually set the state of an element. So in Bubble, states allow you to store information within elements. This is a workflow that is just relevant to our demo. Depending on how you want to implement Liveblocks with a plugin, you may not need this at all. But what we're going to do is when the page loads, we're going to assign whoever loads the page to a random user on our database. And that's kind of how we're going to use the plugin that way. Again, in real production use cases, you'd probably have someone log in and they would be whatever user they are, but to kind of skip that part, kind of focus on the meat, we're not using that. So we will just use like presence tutorial, like which is this page. We'll create a state here. We'll create a new custom state and we'll call it like user ID. User ID. The state type is just going to be text because we're just storing the ID. We're not storing the whole user. And for this, we're also going to do a search for. So on page load, we're just going to, assign them to a random user from our database. So type user, search for users, and it's going to be we'll do, random item. Actually, just items until number 3. There's only 3 anyway. And then a random item, and then their unique ID. So Page loads, gonna get a random item. Random person, basically. Next, we're gonna add the authorize user action. So, Liveblocks, authorize user. The user ID is going to be that state that we have from Presence tutorial. That user ID that we just stored. The room ID is going to be the room ID that we just made. And that is it. And again, we'll have the room by default just full access. Then we'll create the client. Create client. This create client action actually creates an instance of Liveblocks in our Bubble app. The ID token is going to be the result of the user we just authorized. So we'll like kind of authorize a user, say, hey, Liveblocks, this is a user that you should pay attention to. And, you know, then we're going to get their ID token, which right now we're doing it in the workflow. Again, in a production app, maybe you don't do it in the workflow. Maybe you kind of store the ID token in your database. Maybe you authorize them when they enable something else. But that's the basic thing. You can leave throttle and lost connection time as is. If you're interested, you can check the documentation or even just click show documentation here to learn more about what that is. Next, we're going to add the enter room action. This is what actually brings the user into the room. So for room ID, again, it's tutorial room or whatever you use to create your room in that very first kind of create room step. User ID, it's going to be our Presence tutorial user ID. And we can leave the rest as is. So set user ID, authorize user, create client. Let's preview it and see what happens. Nice. So we've got a user in the corner that has kind of showed up here. So we have entered the room. Let's try this again. Let's pop it up on 2 pages. Nice, 2 users. So we're both in here. It looks like our activity indicator is working pretty well. Working pretty well. We've got it set up. And that is basically it. So that is kind of some basic steps of how you would build a real-time presence tracker. One of the many things that you might do with the free Liveblocks plugin for Bubble by Lunch Pail Labs. Thanks for checking it out. And in a subsequent tutorial, we'll actually demo how to enable like live cursors. So we'll take this positioning here and, you know, kind of make it so you can see maybe where users on the page for more advanced use cases. But that's it. Thanks for tuning in.